The beeping monitors fell silent as Marissa placed her small hand on Mr. Whitmore's forehead. 9 years old, homeless, and unwelcome in this wealthy hospital wing, security rushed toward her when the impossible happened. The millionaire's eyes opened for the first time in 3 years. Before we dive into this incredible story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell if you believe in unexpected miracles. Now let's discover how a homeless girl and a comatose millionaire's paths crossed in the most extraordinary way. Marissa Robinson huddled beneath the highway overpass as rain pounded the concrete around her, clutching her worn backpack containing everything she owned in the world. At 9 years old, she had already experienced more hardship than most adults, her bright eyes and quick mind at odds with her circumstances. The wealthy town of Westbrook, Connecticut, with its manicured lawns and luxury cars, seemed to exist in an entirely different universe from her daily reality. Just 6 months earlier, she had watched her mother Letitia take her final labored breaths in their tiny apartment, her untreated heart condition finally claiming her life after Westbrook General Hospital had repeatedly minimized her symptoms, suggesting her complaints were exaggerated. When she described her chest pain, the doctor had muttered something about typical pain responses in certain communities when he thought Marissa couldn't hear. After her death, with no known relatives and a system too overwhelmed to properly place her, Marissa had slipped through the cracks, choosing the streets over a group home after hearing horror stories from other kids. Her days fell into a predictable pattern of survival, waking before dawn to avoid the police patrols that would surely return her to social services, washing in public restrooms, and spending hours in the library, where she devoured books on every subject. Her natural intelligence flourished despite her circumstances. The librarians noticed her presence but asked few questions, sometimes leaving granola bars or juice boxes at her table when she was absorbed in a book. Food came from dumpster diving behind the upscale restaurants of Westbrook's downtown district, where perfectly good meals were discarded simply because they weren't presentation perfect for the wealthy clientele. Marissa became an expert at timing, knowing exactly when Fresh Harvest tossed their unsold artisan sandwiches or when Bella Italia threw away untouched breadsticks. Sleep was the trickiest part of her existence, a constantly shifting challenge as she rotated between abandoned buildings, hidden corners of parks, and occasionally the public library's reading nook when the weather was particularly brutal. One rainy Tuesday evening in October, while seeking shelter from a sudden downpour, Marissa discovered an unlocked service entrance at Westbrook General Hospital. She had been avoiding the hospital since her mother's death, the sterile hallways holding too many painful memories. But desperation overcame her reluctance as thunder cracked overhead. The service corridors were quiet at night, the basement levels housing laundry facilities and storage areas that offered warmth and safety. Over several nights, Marissa grew bolder in her exploration, venturing higher in the building after midnight when staffing was minimal. It was during one of these nocturnal explorations that she first glimpsed James Whitmore through the glass wall of an exclusive private room on the hospital's top floor. The white businessman lay motionless amid a tangle of tubes and wires, the steady beep of monitors the only indication of life. The luxury suite looked more like a hotel room than a hospital space, with expensive furnishings and a separate sitting area where no visitors seemed to sit. Marissa overheard nurses whispering about the Whitmore case, the tech billionaire who had collapsed suddenly during a charity gala 3 years earlier, and had remained unresponsive despite the best medical care money could buy. The girl's curiosity about this sleeping giant grew night after night, especially after an encounter with Officer Brennan, a night security guard whose face twisted in suspicion the moment he spotted Marissa near the elevator bank. "What are you doing here, girl?" Brennan had demanded, his hand moving to his taser as if Marissa posed some imminent threat rather than being a skinny child in oversized clothes. "Looking for my mom," Marissa had lied, using the only excuse she thought might work. "She works as a cleaner." The guard's eyes had narrowed, clearly not believing her. "Sure she does. I know all the cleaning staff, and none of them have a kid like you. Now get out before I call the authorities about a trespasser." The rough grip on her arm as Brennan escorted her to the exit left bruises that lingered for days, the guard muttering about, "These people always causing trouble," just loud enough for Marissa to hear. The incident should have deterred her, but instead it fueled her interest in the mysterious Mr. Whitmore. In the hospital waiting room the following week, Marissa found a discarded newspaper with a feature about Whitmore's condition and the medical mystery it presented. The article described how doctors remained baffled by his persistent coma despite no obvious brain damage, how his massive fortune continued accumulating even as he lay unconscious, and how his companies carried on under temporary leadership. Something about the sleeping millionaire called to Marissa, perhaps the strange vulnerability of seeing someone so powerful rendered so helpless. That night, despite the risk, Marissa made her decision. She would return to the hospital and find a way back to Whitmore's room, driven by a curiosity she couldn't explain even to herself. The hospital's security measures tightened noticeably in the days following Marissa's encounter with Officer Brennan. New keycard readers appeared on doors that had previously been unlocked, and additional guards patrolled the corridors during the overnight hours. For most children, these obstacles would have been insurmountable, but necessity had made Marissa resourceful beyond her years. She observed the patterns of the night shift, noting which employees propped doors for smoke breaks and which corridors remained unwatched during shift changes. The service elevator became her primary route, accessed during the 15-minute window, when the kitchen staff departed and the cleaning crew had yet to arrive. During her third night of renewed exploration, Marissa narrowly avoided detection by ducking into a supply closet, where she came face to face with Walter, an older black janitor who had worked at Westbrook General for over 20 years. The man's eyes widened in surprise, but instead of calling security, he simply asked, "You got somewhere safe to sleep tonight, girl?" When Marissa remained silent, Walter sighed and reached into his lunch bag, handing over half a sandwich. "My youngest was about your age when I started here. Just be careful. They've got cameras in most places now." This unexpected alliance proved crucial. Walter occasionally left a maintenance closet unlocked or shared bits of information about security patrols. Marissa repaid the kindness by helping straighten supply shelves or mopping floors when no one was watching, tasks that eased the burden on Walter's arthritic knees. On a quiet Sunday evening, while waiting for the optimal moment to sneak upstairs, Marissa discovered a stack of newspapers in the hospital waiting room. Flipping through them idly, a headline caught her eye: Whitmore Foundation funds Rural Healthcare Initiative. The accompanying photo showed a younger, vibrant James Whitmore cutting a ribbon at a clinic opening, his confident smile a stark contrast to the motionless figure Marissa had observed. Subsequent articles detailed other philanthropic efforts: scholarships for underprivileged students, technology centers in low-income areas, and medical research grants. As Marissa absorbed these details, a memory surfaced from the recesses of her mind, one she had nearly forgotten amid the trauma of her mother's death and subsequent homelessness. 2 years earlier, during a fierce rainstorm, Marissa and her mother had been walking home from a bus stop after her mom's late shift at the diner, both soaked to the skin despite sharing a flimsy umbrella. A sleek black car had pulled alongside them, the window lowering to reveal a man's concerned face. "You shouldn't be out in this weather. Can I give you a ride somewhere?" Letitia had hesitated, years of caution making her wary, but the rain had intensified and Marissa had been shivering violently. The man had seemed genuinely concerned, his eyes kind as he assured them, "I'm just heading home from a meeting. It's no trouble." During the brief ride to their apartment building, the man had introduced himself simply as James, asking thoughtful questions about their lives without judgment. Upon learning that Letitia walked nearly 2 miles from the bus stop after 12-hour shifts, he had pressed several $100s into her hand despite her protests. "For taxi rides home on nights like this," he had insisted. "No one should have to choose between safety and paying bills." The connection clicked into place as Marissa stared at the newspaper photo. Their Good Samaritan had been James Whitmore himself. This realization deepened Marissa's inexplicable attachment to the comatose billionaire, transforming her curiosity into something more personal. Later that night, as Marissa finally reached Whitmore's private room, she overheard a conversation that sent a chill through her young body. Our Eleanor Chin, a neurologist of Chinese descent whom Marissa had observed regularly checking Whitmore's condition, was engaged in a heated discussion with a hospital administrator. His EEG showed minimal changes last week. That's more activity than we've seen in months, she insisted, her voice passionate, despite its professional restraint. We can't ethically recommend termination of support at this point. The administrator's response was dismissive. The board has been patient for 3 years, doctor. His son is pushing for resolution, and frankly, we need the suite for patients with better prospects. Insurance has maxed out, and even Whitmore's funds aren't infinite. The ethics committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, with discontinuation likely by week's end. Dr. Chin had exited the room visibly frustrated, not noticing Marissa hidden behind a linen cart. Later that same night, a well-dressed younger man had visited briefly, his resemblance to Whitmore suggesting a family connection. Unlike the doctor's compassionate demeanor, this visitor had spent mere minutes in the room, mostly on his phone, before telling the night nurse, "Just make him comfortable. We all know this is just prolonging the inevitable." After the visitors departed, Marissa slipped into the room and for the first time spoke directly to the unconscious man. "I remember you," she whispered, settling into the visitor's chair that rarely saw use. "You helped us in the rain that night. Mom used that money for taxi rides like you said, but also to get me new shoes for school." The monitors beeped steadily as Marissa continued talking, sharing details of her day, the book she was reading, and eventually the harder truths of her mother's passing and her current situation. Something about the one-sided conversation brought comfort, a connection to both Whitmore and the memory of her mother. As dawn approached, Marissa reluctantly prepared to leave, whispering, "I'll come back tomorrow." Unaware that within 3 days, the machines keeping Whitmore alive were scheduled to be disconnected. What would you do if you had just 3 days to save someone's life? How far would you go to help a stranger who once showed you kindness? For Marissa Robinson, these weren't hypothetical questions, but urgent realities as she absorbed the devastating news about James Whitmore's fate. The revelation that the hospital planned to disconnect Whitmore's life support sent panic coursing through Marissa's small frame, her breath coming in quick gasps as she hid in a supply closet after overhearing the conversation. The connection she felt to the comatose millionaire defied logical explanation, yet it burned with undeniable intensity, compelling her to action. Despite the increasing risks, she knew she couldn't stay away. Security around the hospital had tightened like a noose, with Officer Brennan seemingly determined to catch the suspicious girl he'd ejected previously. The security guard's descriptions to other staff members were laden with racial undertones. "Probably looking for drugs or something to steal," he had muttered, making Marissa's nocturnal visits increasingly dangerous. During daylight hours, the public library became her war room. Her small fingers typed frantically on a computer as she researched coma patients and recovery stories. Between articles about brain activity and medical case studies, Marissa found numerous accounts of patients responding to familiar voices and touch, even while appearing unresponsive to clinical tests. She clung to this idea as if it were a lifeline. One afternoon, as Marissa hurried back to her temporary shelter in an abandoned car behind a foreclosed property, a group of teenage boys from the wealthy neighborhood spotted her cutting through their park. "Hey, it's that homeless kid," the tallest one called out, nudging his friends. What began as taunting quickly escalated to something uglier, as racial slurs mingled with threats. "This park isn't for your kind," one sneered, shoving Marissa hard enough to send her sprawling onto the wet grass. "Go back to whatever ghetto you crawled out of." The encounter left Marissa with a bloody lip and reinforced her growing understanding of how differently the world treated her compared to children with different colored skin and economic backgrounds. That night, bruised but determined, Marissa executed her most daring plan yet. Instead of leaving Whitmore's room before dawn as usual, she slipped beneath the hospital bed. When a nurse entered for the midnight check, remaining hidden as the woman adjusted equipment and noted vitals. After her departure, Marissa emerged and settled into her now familiar chair, pulling a library book from her backpack. "The doctors don't think you can hear anything," she whispered to Whitmore, "but I found articles saying that's not always true, so I brought something to read to you." For hours, Marissa's soft voice filled the room as she read from the Call of the Wild, occasionally stopping to explain words or share her thoughts on the story. As exhaustion finally claimed her near dawn, Marissa curled up in the visitor's chair, her small hand unconsciously reaching out to rest near Whitmore's on the bed. Walter discovered her there during early morning rounds, shaking her gently awake with concern etched across his weathered features. "This is getting too dangerous, girl," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Brennan's been reviewing security footage, and he's convinced someone's sneaking around at night. If he catches you—" The janitor didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood the likely outcome. Walter provided Marissa with a maintenance closet keycard and instructions on which closet remained unused most nights, a safer alternative to Whitmore's exposed room. "I can't tell you to stop coming," Walter admitted, "but I can try to keep you from getting caught. Just be careful." The hours ticked down relentlessly as Marissa divided her time between library research and nighttime vigils. Charchin noticed subtle changes in Whitmore's brain activity during her examinations, but failed to convince the hospital board that they represented meaningful improvement. "The patterns are inconsistent with typical spontaneous neural activity," she argued during a staff meeting that Marissa eavesdropped on. "Something is stimulating responses, but I can't identify the cause." Meanwhile, across town in a glass-walled office, Bradley Whitmore conducted business with cool efficiency. He signed documents that restructured his father's companies in ways that increasingly centralized control under his authority. "My father always intended for me to take over eventually," he assured board members concerned about the timing of these changes. "I'm simply implementing transitions that would streamline operations once the inevitable occurs." The callousness with which he discussed his father's condition chilled even hardened executives, though few voiced their discomfort openly. By the final night before the scheduled discontinuation of life support, Marissa had developed a plan, born of desperation and childlike faith. Having overheard hospital staff discussing the precise timing of the procedure, scheduled for 10:05 a.m. the following day, she knew this night represented her last chance to reach Whitmore. Evading security with practiced skill, Marissa slipped into the now familiar private room shortly after midnight, her heart racing with urgency. If you were in Marissa's position, would you have risked everything to help someone who once showed you kindness? Comment number 1, if you believe in returning kindness no matter the output, or number 2, if you think Marissa should have protected herself instead. Like and subscribe to find out what happens during Marissa's final desperate attempt to save the man who once helped her and her mother. The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors created a somber soundtrack as Marissa settled into the visitor's chair beside James Whitmore's bed, for what she believed would be the final time. Outside, the October wind howled against the windows of the 12th floor private suite, mimicking the storm of emotions within the young girl's heart. This night felt different from all the previous visits, heavy with finality and desperate hope. The hospital had grown quieter as midnight passed. The skeleton crew of night staff focused on the more active wards several floors below. Marissa pulled her worn backpack onto her lap and withdrew a small framed photograph, the only possession of value she had managed to keep during her months on the street. "This is my mom," she said softly, turning the photo toward the unconscious man. "Her name was Letitia. You met her that rainy night when you drove us home." The image showed a smiling black woman with Marissa's same expressive eyes and determined chin, her arm wrapped protectively around a younger version of her daughter. "She died because nobody at this hospital would take her heart problems seriously," Marissa continued. "3 different doctors told her she was overreacting or seeking pain medication." Her voice cracked as she pressed on. "They said, 'Black women exaggerate pain.' That's what the nurse wrote in her chart. I saw it when they left it on the counter. Mom knew something was really wrong, but they just gave her some pills and sent her home. Every time." The monitors continued their steady rhythm, unchanging despite the emotional weight of Marissa's words. "After you drove us home that night, Mom said there were still good people in the world. She used some of that money you gave us for taxi rides, like you said. But she also bought me new school shoes. Mine had holes, and the kids were making fun of me." Marissa shifted in her seat, moving closer to the bed. I found out something to yesterday, she said. Your charity group turned down funding for the free clinic in our neighborhood 3 years ago, the one that might have helped Mom. This discovery had initially sparked anger in Marissa, a sense of betrayal that threatened to sever her unexplained connection to Whitmore. While researching the Millionaire's philanthropic work, she had stumbled across an article detailing rejected grant applications, including one from the Eastern Heights Community Health Initiative, which would have served her predominantly Black neighborhood. The board decided the area already had adequate healthcare access because of the county hospital 15 miles away, Marissa said. But most people in our neighborhood don't have cars, and the bus takes almost 2 hours each way. The irony wasn't lost on her, that the man she'd been visiting might have indirectly contributed to circumstances similar to those that claimed her mother. Yet something kept her returning. Some intuition that there was more to the story than a simple rejection letter could convey. I'm not mad at you anymore, Marissa confessed after a long silence. I think maybe you didn't know. The article said your foundation rejected the proposal while you were already in the coma. As the night deepened, Marissa's words became more personal, sharing her daily struggles for survival, her dreams of education, and the discrimination she faced as a homeless Black girl in an affluent white community. The librarians are nice to me, she said, but yesterday a woman asked them to make me leave because I looked suspicious, just sitting there, reading. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Hours passed as Marissa continued talking, occasionally reading passages from a dog-eared poetry book she'd borrowed from the library. Emotional exhaustion eventually overcame her small body curling into the oversized chair as sleep claimed her, mid-sentence. Tear tracks dried on her cheeks, one hand still resting on the edge of Whitmore's bed. In another part of the hospital, Dr. Eleanor Chin hunched over computer screens in her office, reviewing James Whitmore's latest neural scans with growing frustration. The patterns showed subtle but undeniable changes, increased activity during certain hours of the night that couldn't be explained by normal circadian rhythms or medical interventions. Something was stimulating Whitmore's brain, creating ripples of response that standard tests weren't designed to measure. There's something we're missing, she muttered to herself, rubbing tired eyes beneath her glasses. The hospital board had been unmoved by her presentation of these anomalies, viewing them as insignificant statistical variations rather than meaningful signs. The decision to withdraw life support remained scheduled for morning, the paperwork already processed through the system. A floor below Whitmore's suite, Officer Brennan began his midnight rounds with particular attention to the executive wing. Recent security reports had noted unusual access card usage patterns, and his suspicions about unauthorized presence had intensified. I'm telling you, someone's sneaking around up there, he had insisted to his supervisor earlier that day. Probably that same Black kid I caught lurking around before. You know how they are, always looking for something to steal. His supervisor had dismissed his concerns, but authorized additional patrols to put the matter to rest. An opportunity Brennan seized with disturbing enthusiasm. Walter, mopping the third-floor hallway, overheard Brennan radioing his intention to conduct a surprise inspection of the 12th floor. The older janitor immediately abandoned his bucket and hurried toward the service elevator, hoping to reach Marissa before security did. His arthritic knees protested the sudden exertion, slowing his progress as he navigated the back corridors of the massive hospital. The elevator seemed to crawl between floors, each mechanical whir amplifying Walter's anxiety. Near dawn, Marissa awakened to the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway outside Whitmore's room. Disoriented momentarily, she quickly registered the danger and looked frantically for a hiding place. The bathroom door stood ajar across the room, offering possible concealment, but reaching it would require crossing open space visible from the hallway windows. As the footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the distinct jingle of security keys, Marissa made an impulsive decision. Instead of running, she rose and moved directly to Whitmore's bedside. I have to go now, she whispered urgently. They're going to turn off these machines today. The doctors don't think you'll ever wake up. Tears welled in her eyes again as the reality of the situation crashed over her. Please wake up. I need you to wake up. I don't have anyone else now. Acting on pure instinct, Marissa reached out and placed her small hand directly on Whitmore's forehead, a gesture of connection and farewell. "Thank you for being kind to us that night," she whispered, voice breaking. "I wish you could wake up and be okay." What happened next would later be described by medical professionals as statistically improbable, and by more spiritually inclined observers as miraculous. Beneath Marissa's touch, James Whitmore's eyelids fluttered. The monitors registered a sudden spike in neural activity, alarm thresholds triggering as vital signs shifted dramatically. As Officer Brennan's hand reached for the door handle outside, Whitmore's eyes opened fully for the first time in 3 years, darting around in confusion before focusing on the small girl standing beside him. His lips moved, forming words that produced no sound after years of disuse. But the recognition in his gaze was unmistakable. The door swung open as medical alarms blared throughout the room, bringing Brennan and a rush of night staff converging on the unexpected crisis. In the chaos that followed, Marissa slipped into the private bathroom, heart pounding, as she listened to the medical team's shocked exclamations through the door. "He's responsive. Get Dr. Chin immediately. BP rising. Heart rate stabilizing. Mr. Whitmore, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." Through a crack in the door, Marissa watched in awe as the miracle she had prayed for unfolded before her, the sleeping giant finally awakening from his long slumber. The news of James Whitmore's miraculous awakening spread through Westbrook with the speed and force of a summer wildfire, consuming all other topics of conversation. By midday, local television crews camped outside the hospital entrance, their satellite vans creating a media village in the parking lot as reporters competed for the most compelling angle on the story. Tech billionaire awakens after 3-year coma dominated headlines across every platform, with medical experts attempting to explain the unexplainable on 24-hour news channels. Within the hospital, Marissa observed the frenzy from a cautious distance, blending into crowded waiting areas where her presence raised few questions amid the general excitement. The girl's emotions formed a complex tangle of relief, wonder, and fear. Relief that Whitmore had awakened, wonder at having witnessed what many were calling a medical miracle, and fear of being discovered as the unauthorized visitor who had spent countless nights by the millionaire's bedside. Walter had found her hiding in a supply closet hours after the awakening, bringing her a cafeteria sandwich and crucial information. "They're saying it's unprecedented," the janitor explained in hushed tones. "Dr. Chin is calling it a spontaneous neurological recovery, but nobody really understands what triggered it. The security cameras in his room weren't recording properly last night. Some kind of technical glitch." He paused, studying Marissa with knowing eyes. "That's lucky for you, girl. You were there when it happened, weren't you?" Marissa's silence had been answer enough. Walter squeezed her shoulder gently. "Sometimes miracles need a little human help. You should probably stay scarce for a few days, though. Brennan is on a rampage about security breaches on the 12th floor." James Whitmore experienced his own form of disorientation as he struggled to reconcile his last clear memories from 3 years earlier with his current reality. His body had weakened significantly despite the physical therapy performed during his coma. His once strong muscles atrophied to a fraction of their former capability. Speaking remained difficult, his voice emerging as a raspy whisper after years of silence, though speech therapists assured him this would improve with time and practice. Most frustrating were the gaps in his memory, fragments missing from the puzzle of his past, including the charity gala where he had collapsed. "You experienced what we call a cryptogenic stroke," Dr. Chin explained during one examination, her gentle manner a balm to his confusion. "That means a stroke without an identifiable cause. You were giving a speech when you suddenly collapsed. The initial damage was relatively minor, but complications developed that prolonged the coma state. Frankly, we don't fully understand why you remained unresponsive for so long, nor why you've awakened now." Despite these medical explanations, Whitmore found himself troubled by a persistent feeling that something or someone important was missing from his recovery story. Dreams and half-memories teased the edges of his consciousness, a small voice speaking in the darkness, stories being read aloud, and a strange sense of companionship during what should have been years of isolation. When he mentioned these impressions to Dr. Chin, she made careful notes but offered no explanation, though her expression suggested she might have theories she wasn't yet ready to share. Bradley Whitmore arrived at the hospital within hours of his father's awakening, his designer suit and practiced smile creating a picture-perfect image of filial devotion. For the cameras clustered near the hospital entrance, "Our family is overwhelmed with gratitude for this miracle," he told reporters, his voice breaking at precisely the right moment. "After 3 long years of waiting and praying, my father has returned to us." In the privacy of Whitmore's hospital room, however, Bradley's performance shifted subtly. His smiles came less frequently, his eyes constantly checking his vibrating phone. His questions focused more on company matters than his father's well-being. "The board is anxious to know your thoughts on the restructuring," he mentioned casually on the second day, placing documents on the bedside table. "Nothing urgent, of course. Just some changes we implemented to streamline operations during your absence." James, still struggling with basic motor coordination, noticed the evasiveness in his son's manner. Without fully understanding its cause, something had changed in their relationship. Some fundamental shift that went beyond the expected adjustments after years of separation. Bradley spoke of the Whitmore Foundation with particular tension, changing subjects whenever James inquired about specific initiatives or funding decisions. "We maintained your vision while adapting to current realities," Bradley assured him vaguely. "Everything's running smoothly." Dr. Chin had warned James against overwhelming himself with business concerns too quickly, emphasizing the need for a gradual reintegration to avoid setbacks. Nevertheless, his businessman's instincts, honed through decades of corporate leadership, detected discrepancies in Bradley's reports that raised quiet alarms. While James focused on recovery, Dr. Chin pursued her own investigation into what had triggered his awakening. Security footage from the surrounding corridors had captured glimpses of a small figure, moving through the hospital late at night on multiple occasions. More intriguingly, she discovered that Whitmore's neural activity had shown regular spikes during overnight hours for weeks before his awakening, times when no medical staff had administered treatments or conducted tests. Someone was visiting him, she concluded during a private meeting with her trusted colleague, Dr. Patel. The pattern suggests his brain was responding to external stimulation, possibly voice or touch, during those nighttime hours. Hospital administration reacted to Dr. Chin's theory with immediate concern about unauthorized access, launching a security review that sent Officer Brennan on a determined hunt for the trespasser captured in fragmented security footage. "Probably just some homeless person looking for drugs," Brennan insisted during a staff briefing, his description of the suspect heavily laden with racial coding. "Small black female, possibly early teens, though could be younger. Likely dangerous and potentially involved in gang activity, given the neighborhood demographics beyond the hospital district." The characterization made Dr. Chin's stomach turn, particularly as the grainy images on screen clearly showed nothing more threatening than a child in oversized clothes. Walter, present during the briefing as part of the maintenance staff, remained silent but watchful, his weathered face betraying no reaction to Brennan's inflammatory descriptions. Later that afternoon, he approached Dr. Chin as she exited the pharmacy, his usual cleaning cart positioned to allow a private conversation in the busy corridor. "About that visitor they're looking for," he began carefully. "I might know something about that situation." Dr. Chin glanced around to ensure privacy before responding. "I'm listening." Walter's revelation about Marissa, shared in careful, measured terms that protected the girl while conveying the essential truth, provided the missing piece of Dr. Chin's puzzle. The janitor described a homeless child who had lost her mother, who had been visiting Whitmore's room to read and talk to him, who had formed an inexplicable connection with the comatose millionaire. "She's a good kid, document smart as a whip, too. Been living on the streets since her mama passed, but still reading books from the library every day." Dr. Chin processed this information with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "And she was there the night Mr. Whitmore woke up?" Walter nodded. "Left just after it happened and been hiding around the hospital since then, far as I know. Got nowhere else to go, especially with this cold snap coming." As their conversation concluded, A memory flash struck James Whitmore in his hospital bed 12 floors above. A small voice sang clearly in his darkness. "I need you." The words echoed in his mind with such clarity that he pressed the nurse call button, suddenly desperate to share this breakthrough with Dr. Chin. Something profound had happened during his years of unconsciousness. Some connection formed that defied medical explanation, and he was now determined to understand exactly what or who had brought him back from the void. Have you ever felt a connection so powerful to someone that it seemed almost supernatural? What would you do if the person who saved your life suddenly disappeared before you could thank them? For James Whitmore, these questions became an obsession as he fought to regain his strength in the days following his awakening. Physical therapy consumed his mornings, each session pushing his limits as atrophied muscles protested the simplest movements. Speech therapy followed, exercises rebuilding the neural pathways between brain and vocal cords, as his formerly confident voice gradually returned. Afternoons brought cognitive assessments, memory tests, and consultations with specialists astonished by his recovery. Yet despite this grueling schedule, Whitmore devoted every spare moment to what the hospital staff had begun calling his mystery project, finding the girl from the security footage. "She was there," Whitmore insisted to Dr. Chin during a private conversation, his voice stronger than it had been days earlier. "I remember a voice, reading to me, telling me stories, sometimes just talking about everyday things." The neurologist had shared the limited security images captured before the system malfunctioned, confirming his impressions without revealing Marissa's identity. Professional ethics prevented her from disclosing information about a minor potentially involved in unauthorized hospital access, especially given the aggressive stance security had taken on the matter. "The brain processes external stimuli even in comatose states in ways we don't fully understand," she explained. "Your subconscious might have formed connections with environmental factors during your coma." Whitmore rejected these clinical explanations with surprising vehemence. "This wasn't just environmental stimulation. Someone was there with me when no one else bothered to visit for more than a few minutes. Someone who talked to me like I could hear them. I need to find her." This determination only intensified when Walter cautiously joined their conversation, providing carefully edited information about a homeless child who might have been seeking shelter in the hospital during cold nights. Though the janitor avoided naming Marissa or sharing her full circumstances, he conveyed enough details to further convince Whitmore of the connection. "A girl that age shouldn't be alone on the streets," Whitmore responded, genuine concern evident in his voice, "especially with winter coming." Outside the hospital walls, Westbrook experienced an unseasonable cold snap that meteorologists described as potentially life-threatening for vulnerable populations. Temperatures plummeted below freezing, shattering October records as bitter winds swept through the affluent community. The town's small homeless population, normally invisible to most residents, suddenly became a public concern, as emergency shelters opened in church basements and community centers. For Marissa, the cold created a desperate situation. Her usual sleeping spots offered little protection from the plummeting temperatures, and the library closed earlier as daylight hours shortened. The abandoned car that had provided shelter throughout summer months now functioned as a metal refrigerator, its windows unable to keep out the penetrating cold. Walter had offered his own modest apartment as temporary refuge, but Marissa refused, unwilling to jeopardize the janitor's job if their connection was discovered. As the girl huddled beneath layers of discarded newspapers in an alley doorway, her thoughts returned repeatedly to James Whitmore. Had the millionaire truly recognized her in that moment of awakening? Would he remember the rainy night 2 years earlier, when he had shown kindness to a struggling mother and child? These questions circled in Marissa's mind as she fought to stay warm, unaware that the object of her thoughts was equally preoccupied with finding her. In his hospital room, Whitmore had begun reviewing files and reports about changes in his companies and foundation during his 3-year absence. The picture emerging from these documents troubled him deeply. His technology firm had shifted focus from educational software toward military applications. The affordable housing initiative he had championed had been quietly shelved in favor of luxury development partnerships. Most disturbing were the foundation's grant records, showing a clear pattern of rejected applications from organizations serving predominantly minority communities. The board determined these proposals didn't meet our updated criteria for demonstrable impact, Bradley explained dismissively when questioned, his tone suggesting the changes were too trivial to warrant discussion. We've increased our overall giving while focusing on projects with measurable outcomes. Whitmore's business instincts, sharp despite his physical limitations, detected the careful evasions in his son's explanations. Show me the minutes from the foundation board meetings for the past year, he requested, noting how Bradley tensed at the simple request. And I want to review the Eastern Heights Community Health Initiative rejection specifically. The mention of this particular proposal, one Whitmore remembered supporting before his collapse, triggered a visible reaction from Bradley. That neighborhood already had healthcare options, his son replied too quickly. The proposal was redundant and poorly structured. The committee was unanimous. Something in his defensive response strengthened Whitmore's resolve to investigate further. With Dr. Chin's cautious assistance and Walter's quiet support, he began reconstructing both his personal history and the changes in his business empire during his absence. Among his fragmented memories, the rainy night encounter with a woman and child began to crystallize, details emerging with increasing clarity. I remember stopping to offer them a ride, he told Dr. Chin. The woman was protective of her daughter, rightly cautious about accepting help from a stranger. The girl had these incredible eyes, so intelligent and watchful. I gave them money for transportation because they were walking miles in dangerous weather after dark. The connection between this memory and his mysterious hospital visitor strengthened his determination to find the child. Despite Bradley's increasing attempts to focus his attention on business matters instead, Whitmore's focus remained fixed on the girl who had reached him in the darkness. Meanwhile, the biting cold intensified as Westbrook entered its third night of record-breaking temperatures. The homeless shelter at First Presbyterian Church reached capacity by early evening, turning away latecomers with apologetic references to fire code regulations. The public library extended its hours as an unofficial warming center, but eventually closed at 9, leaving those without homes to face the dangerous night temperatures. Marissa, having spent her last few dollars on a fast food meal that temporarily warmed her insides, wandered the increasingly deserted streets in search of shelter. Her usual hiding spots in commercial areas had been secured with additional locks after local news reports warned business owners about opportunistic transients seeking access during the cold spell. Exhaustion weighed her steps as she navigated icy sidewalks, her thin jacket providing minimal protection against the wind. Her thoughts moved sluggishly, a dangerous sign of hypothermia's onset that the girl recognized from library books on wilderness survival. Keep moving, she muttered to herself, forcing numb feet forward. Find somewhere warm. The hospital beckoned with its remembered warmth and familiar corridors, but Marissa resisted the temptation. Security would be watching for her now. Being caught meant social services and foster care placement far from Westbrook, away from Walter's kindness and the strange connection she'd formed with James Whitmore. Instead, she sought shelter in a narrow alley between a restaurant and office building, where warm air vented from kitchen exhaust systems. Curling into the tightest ball possible against the brick wall, Marissa pulled cardboard around her small frame and finally surrendered to the exhaustion she'd been fighting for hours. As consciousness faded, her last coherent thought was of Whitmore's eyes meeting hers in that moment of awakening. The recognition and confusion she'd glimpsed before fleeing the room. The restaurant staff found her shortly after dawn, an unresponsive child nearly hidden beneath a frost-covered cardboard, when they arrived to begin breakfast preparation. The ambulance arrived within minutes, paramedics working efficiently to stabilize her dangerously low body temperature as they transported her to the nearest emergency department, Westbrook General Hospital. Severe hypothermia, probable frostbite on extremities, the lead paramedic reported through his radio. Pediatric female, approximately 8 to 10 years old. No identification found. If you were in this emergency situation, would you immediately provide care regardless of the patient's background? Comment number 1, if you believe everyone deserves equal medical treatment, regardless of their circumstances. Or number two, if you think hospital resources should prioritize those with insurance and stable housing. Like and subscribe to follow Marissa's journey as her path crosses with James Whitmore once again, in an unexpected and urgent way. The emergency department at Westbrook General erupted into focused chaos as paramedics wheeled Marissa through the automatic doors, her small body nearly lost beneath warming blankets and monitoring equipment. Core temperature 89.6 and climbing slowly, the lead paramedic reported to the receiving team. Found unresponsive in an alley off Main Street. No identification, no known guardian. Tanya Wilson, the attending physician, quickly assessed the situation, calling for immediate interventions. Get a warming protocol started. Blood work panel, chest x-ray, and page pediatrics. Her efficient commands contrasted sharply with the registration clerk's less urgent questions directed at the paramedics. Any indication of insurance coverage? We need to establish financial responsibility before admitting. Dr. Wilson shot the clerk a withering glance. She's a critically ill child. Treat first. Paperwork later. Despite this reprimand, the pattern of subtle bias continued. As Marissa was transferred to a treatment bay, nurses murmured assumptions about drug involvement or parental neglect. Security personnel hovered unnecessarily close to the unconscious child, and the social worker assigned to the case immediately began discussing group home placement options, rather than investigating her specific circumstances. Typical situation from the East Side, one nurse commented within Dr. Wilson's hearing. Parents probably high somewhere while the kid's freezing to death. The physician's sharp correction. That's speculation, not medicine. Focus on the patient, not assumptions. Temporarily silenced such comments, but didn't eliminate the underlying attitudes. The initial blood work revealed more immediate concerns. Pneumonia developing in both lungs, Dr. Wilson announced, studying the chest x-ray. Temperatures rising too quickly could trigger seizures. Let's move her to pediatric ICU. As the team prepared for transfer, a respiratory therapist named Jasmine recognized the unconscious child. Wait, I think I know this kid. She's at the public library almost every day. The librarians mentioned she might be homeless after her mother died. This information transformed the clinical dynamic, creating a more humanized approach to Marissa's care. On the 12th floor, James Whitmore had progressed to walking short distances with a walker, his determination driving remarkable improvements that surprised even his rehabilitation team. During a particularly grueling physical therapy session, he overheard nurses discussing a pediatric emergency case. A homeless girl found nearly frozen in an alley. Something about their description triggered Whitmore's attention, interrupting his exercise routine. This child, he asked the startled nurses, do you know her name or age? Their inability to provide details only increased his interest. Please find out more information for me. It's important. His unusual request might have been dismissed from any other patient, but Whitmore's status and the miracle of his recovery gave his words special weight. Information traveled quickly through hospital channels, eventually reaching Dr. Chin during her morning rounds. The neurologist immediately recognized the potential connection to the mysterious hospital visitor Walter had described. Rather than taking the information directly to Whitmore, she made her way to the pediatric ICU, where Marissa now lay connected to various monitors, an oxygen mask covering her face as antibiotics flowed through an IV line. Dr. Chin's arrival coincided with a worrying development. Marissa's temperature spiked dangerously, her small body shivering uncontrollably despite warming measures. Febrile seizure risk is high, the pediatric specialist informed her. We're trying to control the fever while treating the pneumonia, but she's severely compromised from chronic malnutrition and exposure. Dr. Chin observed the girl carefully, noting her physical characteristics matched the shadowy figure from the security footage. More compelling was the timing. Her hospital admission coinciding with Dr. Chin's recent conversation with Whitmore about finding his mysterious visitor. I have someone who might know this child, she informed the treatment team cautiously. A patient who believes they may have a connection to her. The pediatrician looked skeptical. We've already called social services. Unless this person is a legal guardian? Dr. Chin interrupted with uncharacteristic firmness. The patient is James Whitmore. The name worked its expected magic, creating immediate attention. Within hours, despite medical protocols and against the advice of his rehabilitation team, Whitmore insisted on being brought to Marissa's bedside. A wheelchair carried him into the pediatric ICU, oxygen tank accompanying him as a precaution against overexertion. The moment Whitmore saw Marissa, recognition flooded his features. "It's her," he whispered, emotion making his voice unsteady. "The girl from the rain and from my room." He reached out with still weakened hands, touching Marissa's arm gently. "What happened to her?" Dr. Chin explained the circumstances of Marissa's admission, her critical condition, and the limited information they had about her background. As Whitmore absorbed these details, Marissa's fever-bright eyes fluttered open briefly, focusing on the millionaire's face with momentary clarity before sliding closed again. "His mother," Whitmore said suddenly. "She had a mother when I met them. Where is she now?" The answer came from Walter, who had entered the ICU after hearing about the development through hospital channels. "She passed about 6 months ago, Mr. Whitmore. Heart condition that nobody took seriously until it was too late. The girl's been on her own since then, staying in the library, abandoned buildings, wherever she could find shelter." This revelation visibly shook Whitmore, his medical monitor showing increased heart rate and blood pressure. "She's been alone all this time, while I was lying unconscious in a luxury suite with round-the-clock care." The inequity of their situation struck him with physical force, a sharp contrast between privilege and abandonment that cut through his successful businessman's worldview. "I want her transferred to the pediatric wing adjacent to my suite," Whitmore declared, his tone brooking no argument. "The best specialists, private nursing staff, whatever she needs." Hospital administration might have resisted such demands from any other patient, but Whitmore's resources and influence rendered objections futile. Within hours, Marissa had been relocated to a top-floor room near Whitmore's suite. Her care team expanded to include specialists in pediatric pneumonia, IOS, and malnutrition. Whitmore himself insisted on spending hours beside the girl's bed, despite his own precarious recovery, reading aloud from library books Walter brought in, reversing the dynamic that had existed during his coma. This unusual arrangement drew attention throughout the hospital, including from Bradley Whitmore, who arrived unexpectedly during one of his father's bedside vigils. Bradley's reaction to seeing Marissa went beyond surprise into visible distaste. "This is why you've been canceling our business meetings? To babysit some random street kid?" His voice carried the sharp edge of entitlement that had become his signature in boardrooms across the country. Whitmore looked up from the book he'd been reading aloud, his expression hardening. "This street kid has a name, Marissa, and she's the reason I woke up after 3 years." Bradley's dismissive laugh echoed in the private room. "You can't seriously believe that. The doctors said it was a spontaneous recovery, statistically inevitable eventually." His gaze swept over Marissa with barely concealed contempt. "Look, I understand you're feeling charitable, but we have foundations for that sort of thing. No need to adopt every stray that wanders in." The racial undertones in Bradley's language weren't subtle, triggering a response in Whitmore that surprised both men with its intensity. "That's enough," he said, voice low but commanding. "This child visited me every night when you couldn't spare 15 minutes twice a month. She talked to me, read to me, treated me like a person, instead of a vegetable or a corporate asset." The confrontation escalated as Bradley shifted tactics, his expression softening into practiced concern. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. The doctors warned about cognitive effects after prolonged coma. Your judgment is compromised." He placed a hand on his father's shoulder, voice lowering confidentially. "We need to focus on your recovery and the company issues requiring immediate attention. I've scheduled a neuropsychiatric evaluation to assess your decision-making capacity." The threat beneath these seemingly concerned words was clear, a challenge to Whitmore's competence that could affect his legal control of his companies and assets. Before Whitmore could respond, a hospital administrator appeared in the doorway, her expression uncomfortable. "Mr. Whitmore, there's a situation regarding the girl's care. Since she's uninsured and has no legal guardian, our policy requires transfer to County General once stabilized. Their social services department has placement protocols for abandoned minors. Bradley sees this opening immediately. Excellent. They have the appropriate resources for cases like this. We'll arrange transportation once she's stable. Whitmore's response came with a strength that belied his physical condition. Marissa stays here, under my care and at my expense. Have my attorneys draw up whatever emergency guardianship paperwork is necessary. The administrator hesitated. Sir, there are legal procedures for child placement that require court approval. Home studies, background checks. Whitmore cut her off with unexpected vehemence. Do you know what happened to her mother? She died because this hospital repeatedly dismissed her symptoms, because medical staff saw her race before they saw her condition. Now you want to ship her son off to an overcrowded county facility because she lacks insurance? His voice had risen enough to disturb Marissa, whose eyes opened briefly, confusion evident as she tried to process the tense scene around her bed. Seeing the girl's distress, Whitmore immediately moderated his tone, returning to the calm, measured voice that had guided multi-million-dollar negotiations throughout his career. I understand there are procedures. Start them immediately, with my attorneys facilitating. In the meantime, I'm covering all costs associated with her care, and she remains in this hospital where I can ensure she receives appropriate treatment. Bradley's face had darkened during this exchange, his carefully maintained facade cracking to reveal genuine anger. This is exactly why we need that competency evaluation. You've known this kid for 5 minutes and you're talking about guardianship? What's next? Adoption? A street kid from Eastern Heights becoming a Whitmore? The naked prejudice in these words hung in the air as Marissa fully regained consciousness, her fever-bright eyes moving between the two men as she processed Bradley's statement. The monitoring equipment registered her increased heart rate and respiratory distress, triggering alarms that brought medical staff running. As doctors swarmed into the room, Bradley retreated, throwing a final comment toward his father. This discussion isn't over. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Left alone in the hallway during the medical intervention, father and son stared at each other across a divide far greater than physical distance. The empire Whitmore had built, now a battleground between inherited privilege and awakened conscience. Westbrook General's largest conference room had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Normally reserved for medical conferences and board deliberations, today it contained an unprecedented gathering of hospital leadership, legal representatives, and one very determined James Whitmore, who sat at the head of the table, despite still requiring supplemental oxygen and intermittent rest periods. I've called this meeting to address several interconnected issues, Whitmore began, his voice stronger than it had been since awakening. First, the care of Marissa Robinson, currently a patient in this hospital. Second, the systematic discrimination evidenced in Westbrook General's treatment protocols. And third, the operations of the Whitmore Foundation during my incapacitation. The hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Harrison, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Whitmore, while we appreciate your concerns, hospital policy regarding uninsured minor patients is quite clear. Whitmore raised a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. I've reviewed your policies extensively with my legal team. Nowhere do they mandate transferring a critically ill child to an overcrowded county facility simply because of insurance status. That's a decision based on financial considerations rather than medical best practices. His gaze swept the room, challenging anyone to contradict him. Furthermore, I've obtained Marissa's mother's medical records. This announcement sent a ripple of tension through the administrators. Letitia Robinson's file appeared on the conference room screen, key sections highlighted in accusatory red. Over 18 months, Letitia Robinson came to this emergency department 7 times, reporting cardiac symptoms. Each visit resulted in a dismissive diagnosis: anxiety, indigestion, stress response. Pain medication seeking was noted in her chart after her 3rd visit, despite no evidence supporting this assumption. Dr. Chin, present at Whitmore's request, spoke up from her position near the door. This pattern of dismissing pain reports from Black women is well documented in medical literature. Studies show they receive less pain medication and are taken less seriously than white patients reporting identical symptoms. The hospital's legal counsel intervened, his expression guarded. Without suggesting any specific liability in this individual case, we should continue this discussion in a more appropriate venue. Whitmore cut him off. This isn't about liability, though that will certainly come. It's about acknowledging a pattern that cost a young woman her life and left her daughter homeless. A pattern this institution has an obligation to correct. The meeting continued with Whitmore presenting data his team had compiled, showing statistical disparities in treatment outcomes between white patients and patients of color at Westbrook General. Treatment times, pain management protocols, and admission decisions all revealed subtle but persistent bias that had gone unaddressed by hospital leadership. As the presentation concluded, Walter stepped forward from where he had been waiting quietly against the wall. "I've worked here 23 years, the janitor said, his voice steady despite the unusual circumstance of addressing hospital leadership. "I've seen how different patients get treated, how folks who look like me wait longer, get fewer tests, have their complaints taken less seriously. Nothing in Mr. Whitmore's presentation surprises any of the black staff here. His simple testimony carried a weight that statistics alone couldn't convey, silencing the room momentarily. Dr. Harrison eventually responded, his corporate demeanor cracking slightly. If such disparities exist in our care delivery, they certainly weren't intentional. Westbrook General has always prided itself on intentions don't matter to the dead, Whitmore interrupted. Results matter, and your results show a system that failed Marissa Robinson and countless others like her. He leaned forward, voice strengthening with conviction. I'm establishing $10 million fund specifically for addressing healthcare disparities at this hospital. Independent auditors will review all protocols. Training programs will be implemented for all staff, and community representatives will have oversight positions. The stunned silence that followed this announcement was broken by the arrival of Bradley Whitmore, who strode into the conference room with the confident air of someone accustomed to controlling such gatherings. I apologize for my tardiness, he announced smoothly. I was finalizing the paperwork for my father's comprehensive neuropsychiatric evaluation. His doctors are concerned about impulsive decision-making following prolonged coma states. The calculated move might have worked months earlier, when James Whitmore had been merely an unconscious figurehead. Now, however, it encountered the full force of his recovered faculties. The evaluation has already been completed, the elder Whitmore countered calmly. Dr. Ann supervised it yesterday. The results showed no cognitive impairment affecting my decision-making capabilities. He nodded to his attorney, who distributed copies of the assessment to everyone present. My legal team has also been quite busy reviewing the Whitmore Foundation's activities during my absence. Particularly interesting was the pattern of rejected grant applications from minority-serving organizations. Bradley's confident facade faltered slightly. The board made those decisions collectively, based on established criteria. The board you systematically replaced with your own allies, Whitmore interjected. 4 original members resigned under pressure, all coincidentally the same members who had supported my diversity initiatives before my illness. The detailed dossier his team had compiled revealed a disturbing pattern. Bradley had systematically redirected the foundation's resources away from underserved communities, particularly those with predominantly black populations. Funding that had been earmarked for educational programs in Eastern Heights had been reallocated to architectural vanity projects in wealthy districts. Healthcare initiatives targeting racial disparities had been shelved in favor of arts endowments benefiting institutions Bradley frequented socially. Most damning was the discovery of Bradley's attempted embezzlement scheme, disguised as consulting fees to shell companies he controlled indirectly. The foundation wasn't the only target, Whitmore continued, his voice reflecting disappointment rather than anger. Whitmore Technologies' minority recruitment program was dismantled. The affordable housing initiative I launched was quietly shelved. Every project that didn't directly benefit people who look and live like us was systematically undermined. Bradley's expression hardened as he abandoned pretense. Those programs were financial drains with minimal return on investment. I streamlined operations to maximize shareholder value while you were lying there useless. The naked contempt in his voice silenced the room. You built a business empire, then decided to give it away to people who didn't earn it. I preserved your legacy. Whitmore regarded his son with newfound clarity. My legacy isn't stock portfolios or market share, Bradley. It's the impact we have on people's lives, something you never understood. He signaled to his attorney, who distributed another document to the attendees. This outlines the restructuring of the Whitmore Foundation's board, effective immediately. Bradley is removed from all positions within the foundation and my companies, pending a full financial investigation. As security personnel appeared at the conference room door, Bradley's composure finally shattered. You can't do this. I kept everything running while you were a vegetable, and now you're throwing it all away because of some black street kid? The racial animus behind his words hung nakedly in the air, confirming everything Whitmore had suspected about his son's true character. As Bradley was escorted from the building, the meeting continued with discussions of Marissa's situation. Walter had been visiting the girl daily, bringing books and companionship during Whitmore's rehabilitation sessions. She's smart as they come, the janitor reported. Been teaching herself from library books all these months. Could probably skip a grade or two with proper schooling. Dr. Chin confirmed that Marissa's physical recovery was progressing well, though the psychological impacts of her experiences would require longer-term support. Foster placement is the standard procedure, the social worker assigned to the case explained. Though finding an appropriate home can be challenging for older children, particularly given her recent trauma. Whitmore's response was immediate and resolute. I've already filed for emergency guardianship with the family court. My attorneys are expediting the process. The emergency guardianship hearing took place in a sparsely furnished family courtroom with creaky benches and the faint scent of disinfectant lingering in the air. Despite the formality of the setting, the case had attracted rare attention, partly due to James Whitmore's presence and partly because of the public fascination surrounding the girl he credited with saving his life. Marissa Robinson sat at one end of the long table, her thin frame swallowed by an oversized sweater and jeans provided by the hospital's charity closet. Walter sat beside her, his large hand resting protectively on the back of her chair. On the other side sat a court-appointed guardian, the social worker assigned to Marissa's case, and an assistant from the county legal office. At the opposite end, James Whitmore sat in a wheelchair, a cashmere coat draped over his lap, and an oxygen tank humming softly at his side. His attorney reviewed papers methodically, occasionally leaning over to clarify a legal point or strategy. Though still pale from recovery, Whitmore's posture was straight, his eyes clear, his voice steady. Your Honor, he began when prompted, I am petitioning for emergency guardianship of Marissa Robinson. I believe this young girl has been failed repeatedly by the systems meant to protect her, and I intend to give her the stability, care, and opportunity she deserves. Judge Ellen McCarthy, a composed woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched low on her nose, regarded Whitmore with a mixture of professional skepticism and quiet admiration. Mr. Whitmore, you've been out of a coma for less than a month. Are you certain this is a commitment you are ready for? Guardianship is a long-term responsibility, not a symbolic gesture. Whitmore nodded. I understand that, Your Honor. I also understand what it feels like to depend on others for survival. During my coma, I was kept alive by machines and professionals doing their jobs. But what brought me back, what no one can explain medically, was Marissa. He turned slightly to glance at the girl beside him. She came every night. She read to me. She talked to me. She gave me companionship in a place where even my own family failed to show up consistently. The social worker cleared her throat delicately, signaling her turn to speak. With respect, Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore's intentions may be admirable, but there are procedures for a reason. Marissa has no known living relatives, and she qualifies for priority placement in our foster system. Walter, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. She's been in the system. That's why she ran. Her mama didn't trust it, and neither did she. No disrespect, but sending her back into that would undo every bit of healing she started in the past few weeks. Judge McCarthy looked down at the stack of reports in front of her, fingers tapping against the folder labeled Robinson, Marissa. Included in the file were medical records, school reports, psychological evaluations, and a character reference from the hospital's lead pediatrician. It painted a picture of a gifted child who had endured tragedy, systemic neglect, and the harshest edges of poverty, and who had still shown extraordinary compassion to a stranger. The court-appointed guardian, an older woman named Ms. Keller, adjusted her reading glasses and addressed the room. I interviewed Marissa yesterday. She expressed a clear desire to stay with Mr. Whitmore. She's articulate, self-aware, and remarkably intelligent for her age. I have concerns, of course, about media attention, the sudden change in environment, and the physical limitations Mr. Whitmore is still facing. But I also believe in what's best for the child. And right now, she believes this man is her family. The courtroom grew quiet as Judge McCarthy leaned back in her chair and studied both of them. The child in question and the billionaire tech mogul recovering from the brink of death, a pairing no one could have predicted. Finally, the judge spoke. I'm granting temporary emergency guardianship to Mr. Whitmore, effective immediately. A full review will be scheduled in 90 days to evaluate the arrangement's stability. Until then, Marissa will remain in his care, with weekly visits from a court-appointed case manager. A wave of emotion passed visibly across Marissa's face. Relief, uncertainty, even disbelief. She looked at Whitmore, unsure of the etiquette in such moments, and he offered a warm smile that told her everything would be okay. As the judge stood and exited the courtroom, Walter released a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. About time someone in this town did right by that girl, he muttered. The media frenzy outside the courthouse required an alternative exit. Hospital security coordinated with the local police department to escort Marissa and Whitmore out the back entrance, avoiding the reporters gathered near the main doors, shouting questions and flashing cameras. How does it feel to adopt your coma savior? Is this about guilt or redemption? Will Marissa Robinson inherit the Whitmore fortune? Inside the car, Marissa stared out the tinted window at the cluster of reporters chasing headlines about a story they didn't understand. Why do they care so much? She asked softly. Whitmore replied without hesitation. Because you did something no one expected. You reminded people that real connection doesn't care about money or status or even consciousness. Back at the hospital, a celebration awaited them. Staff from various departments lined the hallway outside the pediatric wing with balloons and handmade signs. A banner stretched across the entryway. Welcome home, Marissa. Dr. Chin stepped forward, offering a bouquet of flowers and a warm hug. You've turned this hospital upside down in the best possible way, she whispered. Even Officer Brennan, visibly uncomfortable in the background, managed a stiff nod as Marissa passed him. Walter slapped him on the shoulder with a laugh. Don't worry, Brennan. She's legal now. You don't have to chase her out anymore. Later that evening, in the spacious hospital suite now shared by both Marissa and Whitmore, they sat by the window watching the sun dip below the Westbrook skyline. You know, Whitmore began, I've had the top engineers at my company working on AI learning systems for a decade. And yet, nothing they've made comes close to the empathy and intuition you showed by just being present. Marissa smiled, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the window glass. I didn't think anyone noticed me before, she said. Even when I was in school, I felt invisible. Whitmore turned to look at her. You're not invisible anymore, and you never were to me. He pulled out a thin folder from the side table and handed it to her. Inside were blueprints, sketches, and financial projections for the newest division of the Whitmore Foundation, the Robinson Initiative, aimed at providing support for homeless children, educational scholarships, and medical advocacy for marginalized communities. I want your help running this, he said. Not now, of course, but in a few years. I'll manage the grown-up stuff until then. But the vision, it's yours. Marissa looked at the folder, stunned. This is mine? He nodded. And one more thing. He handed her a new library card, her name printed cleanly across the front. Marissa Robinson. The library asked if you wanted a fresh card since you'll have a permanent address now. They also want to name a reading room after your mom. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. It was the kind of smile that carried the weight of everything she'd survived and the promise of everything that lay ahead. The news of James Whitmore's miraculous awakening had already gripped the public imagination. But once the story expanded to include a mysterious homeless girl who had allegedly played a pivotal role in his recovery, the media turned their collective lens toward a new narrative. One more intimate, more human, and in many ways more explosive. News anchors leaned forward with hushed voices as they relayed speculative details. She came to him in the silence, doctors say, night after night. And then one day he woke up. Who is this mystery girl? And how did a homeless child slip past hospital security for weeks without anyone noticing? Talk shows debated the ethics of Whitmore's subsequent guardianship request. Some praised his compassion, hailing him as a philanthropist who practiced what he preached. Others, however, raised concerns. Is this really about care or control, one pundit asked. Let's not forget, this girl is a minor with no legal background check, and she's suddenly at the center of a billionaire's estate? The internet erupted with its usual mix of praise, suspicion, and wild conspiracy theories. Some insisted Marissa was a plant, part of an elaborate PR scheme. Others claimed she had supernatural abilities. A trending hashtag, #Miracle Marissa, topped social platforms for nearly a week. Through it all, Marissa tried to stay grounded. Back at the hospital, she returned to a routine that, while unfamiliar, brought comfort. Breakfast with Whitmore in their shared suite, tutoring with Dr. Chin's niece, a high school senior volunteering during her gap year, physical therapy exercises in the pediatric wing's activity room. For the first time in a long time, Marissa's life had structure and safety. But the outside world didn't forget her, nor did it stop pressing for answers. One reporter, Cheryl Maddox, dug deeper than the rest. A tenacious investigative journalist with a reputation for uncovering hidden truths, she'd been following the Whitmore case since the first whispers of his awakening. Her sources at the hospital had provided tantalizing hints. A girl sneaking into the executive wing at night, a janitor who seemed to know more than he admitted, and irregular security footage that conveniently went missing the same night Whitmore opened his eyes. Determined to learn more, Maddox staked out the hospital's rear service entrance, where deliveries came and went with less scrutiny. Dressed as a maintenance worker, she slipped inside one morning, camera hidden beneath her uniform jacket. While pretending to check floor drains, she recorded a hallway conversation between two nurses. She's staying in the executive suite with him now. Can you believe that? Honestly, I think it's sweet. The way she talks to him, like they're equals. It's like he's not James Whitmore, the billionaire, to her. Just James saw. Maddox left with her scoop and published the story that evening. Coma tycoon shares recovery suite with street girl who woke him. The article went viral. Within hours, the hospital was flooded with media inquiries, and the Whitmore Foundation's public relations team scrambled to contain the narrative. James Whitmore called an emergency meeting of his board of directors, not just to discuss the media fallout, but to address internal matters that had been festering beneath the surface. He sat at the head of the conference table, Marissa beside him. She wore a navy blue dress one of the nurses had helped her pick out, her natural curls pinned back with a clip Dr. Chin had given her. I want to make something clear, Whitmore began. Marissa is not a publicity tool. She is my ward, and she will be treated with the same respect you would offer any member of my family. One board member cleared his throat. With all due respect, James, there are concerns about public perception. This story has gone international. Some donors are uneasy. They think you're distracted. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. Distracted? From what? From the foundation's mission to serve underserved communities? From correcting the course after years of mismanagement during my coma? If anything, Marissa has helped me refocus. He turned to her. Would you mind sharing what you told me last night? Marissa hesitated, then nodded. I said that maybe if people saw more stories like mine, they'd realize kids like me aren't invisible. We're not throwaways. We just need someone to believe in us. The room fell silent. Whitmore let it hang before continuing. She's right. And starting today, the foundation will launch the Visibility Project, a series of grants, scholarships, and media campaigns designed to amplify stories from underrepresented communities. Another board member shifted uncomfortably. That's admirable, James, but donors may see it as political. It's not political, he cut in. It's personal. The room fell quiet again. Behind closed doors, Marissa watched and listened, absorbing the adult world's sharp edges. These were not the silent hours she'd spent beside a sleeping man. This was power at work, spoken with calm precision, cloaked in money, wrapped in language that sounded neutral, but cut like glass. After the meeting, Whitmore's attorney handed him a private report. I think you'll want to read this, the lawyer said quietly. It's about your son. Bradley Whitmore had not taken kindly to his expulsion from the foundation or his father's business empire. Now, according to the report, he was rallying several shareholders to challenge his father's leadership. He was also giving private interviews under the condition of anonymity, implying that James's judgment was impaired and that Marissa's presence was exploitative. He's building a case, sir, slowly but methodically. Whitmore looked over at Marissa, who was flipping through a children's science book someone had brought from the hospital library. I've faced hostile takeovers before, he said, voice calm, but never one that tried to erase a child to win. The following day, Whitmore arranged a private interview with Cheryl Maddox. People are going to write stories about her, with or without us, he said to Marissa beforehand. Better we tell the truth than let them tell lies. They sat together on a couch in the sunlit visitors' lounge, Maddox across from them with a notepad and voice recorder. Why did you let her in? Maddox asked. Why open your life to someone you barely knew? Whitmore nodded at Marissa. She woke me up. I mean that literally. Her voice, her presence, was the only constant in the void. I don't remember the coma, not in any linear way, but I remember her. He turned toward Marissa. You saved me. The journalist turned to the girl. And why did you keep coming back, Marissa? Why this man? She looked up, her voice small but steady. Because he helped me once, a long time ago. And then he needed help, even when he couldn't ask. And what now? Maddox asked. What do you want from all this? Marissa hesitated. I want other kids like me to be seen, to be helped before it's too late. The article published 2 days later, the headline read, She saved me first, inside the bond that woke a billionaire. It was the most shared story of the year. Donations to the Whitmore Foundation surged, critics quieted, and Bradley's shareholder rebellion faltered under the weight of public goodwill. But none of that mattered to Marissa. What mattered was the letter she received a week later, on soft cream paper, in neat cursive. It read, Dear Marissa, my name is Dr. Penelope Jones. I was your mother's attending physician during her final visit to Westbrook General. I failed her, and I've lived with that regret every day since. I read about you in the news. I'm sorry it took a miracle for people to notice you. But I wanted you to know she would be proud of you. Beyond words. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. It was the first time someone from the hospital had admitted fault. Marissa read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of her new backpack, next to her library card. Autumn deepened, and with it came a shift, both in the air and in the way the world saw Marissa Robinson. Where once she had existed only in the margins, overlooked, forgotten, now she occupied the center of a story that had captivated a nation. People sent letters, books, gift cards. Schools invited her to speak. One teacher wrote from Oklahoma, I read your story to my students. They cried. They said they didn't know homeless kids could be so brave. But for Marissa, fame wasn't a warm coat. It wasn't a permanent bed or the scent of her mother's perfume, long since faded from the only keepsake she had left, a scarf. Fame was confusing, loud, heavy, and even in the safety of the hospital's suite, surrounded by kindness, there were nights when she still curled beneath the blankets and whispered, I miss you, Mom, into the quiet. Whitmore noticed the shifts. She'd stopped laughing as much, stopped reading out loud. When she did speak, it was often in clipped sentences. Yes, sir. I'm fine. No, thank you. He asked Dr. Chin for help. She's likely experiencing post-traumatic processing, the neurologist said. Delayed onset. Her brain was in survival mode for so long that now in safety, it's trying to make sense of what she endured. Dr. Chin brought in a therapist, black, female, young, someone Marissa might trust. Her name was Dr. Brielle Mason, and she didn't ask questions right away. She just showed up. She played Uno. She brought puzzles. And when Marissa didn't speak, she didn't push. Eventually, the words came, in pieces. My mom used to sing that song when the lights got cut off. Or, one night, I hid in a dumpster. There were rats. I didn't scream. I thought if I screamed, they'd know I was there. Dr. Mason wrote careful notes in a soft leather journal, always with Marissa's permission. You're safe now, she said. But safety, it turned out, was a complicated thing. One Sunday, as leaves spiraled from the trees outside the hospital window, Marissa collapsed in the hallway. One moment she was walking with Walter to the vending machine. The next, her legs gave out and she crumpled to the floor. Staff rushed in. BP, dangerously low. Blood sugar bottomed out, heart rate erratic. They stabilized her quickly, thanks to the close monitoring Whitmore insisted on. But it shook everyone, especially Whitmore. Why didn't anyone see this coming, he demanded, voice sharp enough to silence the room. Dr. Chin, ever calm, laid out the truth. Malnutrition doesn't vanish just because a child eats well for a month. Her organs are still recovering. Her growth patterns are disrupted. She has deficiencies that we're still identifying. And stress, emotional trauma, can delay healing. Whitmore felt helpless in a way that money couldn't fix. He sat beside her hospital bed, now in ICU, watching the monitors beep rhythmically, and asked himself the question that had haunted him from the beginning. Why her? Why did this girl walk into my life? And then, why didn't anyone else help her first? In the hours that followed, he made phone calls. He summoned doctors from across the country, pediatric nutritionists, trauma specialists, child psychologists. He had them flown in, housed, compensated. He didn't care what it cost. Meanwhile, Marissa recovered slowly. When she woke, her voice was hoarse. Did I scare you? Whitmore chuckled, though his eyes were red. You scared half the state. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. You just have to get better. She nodded it, but she also asked quietly, will you still want me if I'm sick? Whitmore leaned forward, his hand wrapping around hers. There's nothing you could be that would make me stop wanting you. It was the closest he'd come to saying he loved her. She felt it anyway. Outside the hospital, media speculation surged again. Some asked if Marissa's collapse was due to a hidden illness. Others questioned Whitmore's ability to care for a child with complex medical needs. Bradley, ever opportunistic, reappeared on a business podcast. My father's heart is in the right place, he said smoothly. But he's not in the right condition to raise a child, especially one with special needs. The backlash was swift. Hashtags like Marissa deserves better in Washoe believe her trended for days. Commentators called out the racial double standards in the coverage. Why, they asked, was Marissa being scrutinized more than any of the billionaires accused of far worse? Whitmore didn't issue statements. Instead, he focused on Marissa's care and on something else, the foundation. He restructured it entirely, brought in new board members from communities historically excluded, created grants for Black mental health programs, funded emergency shelters for homeless youth, with trauma-informed staff and legal aid. He called the first initiative the Marissa Model. When he showed her the brochures, her face lit up for the first time in weeks. They're going to build shelters named after me? He nodded. Because no child should sleep in an alley again. She smiled, but then looked down. Some of the kids won't be lucky like me. They won't find a you. Whitmore's voice softened. Then we'll build 100 me's, 1,000, people who see them, listen to them, believe them. Later that week, the hospital held a small ceremony, just family and staff, a quiet acknowledgement of Marissa's journey, of the lives changed by her presence. Dr. Chin spoke first. There are moments in medicine that transcend science. Moments where healing comes from something we can't measure in charts. Marissa brought one of those moments into our hospital. She reminded us that sometimes a child carries the power to wake up not just a man, but a whole system. Walter followed. He kept it short. She made me proud to work here again. And finally, Whitmore stood. He didn't use notes, didn't use a microphone. He simply said, "She saved me. I just hope I can return the favor." The room fell silent. Marissa, sitting beside him, reached out and took his hand. And in that moment, there was no miracle, no headlines, no coma, just a girl and the man she woke. The snow came early to Westbrook that year. It coated the sidewalks outside the hospital in soft white, a silent hush that settled over the town like a benediction. Inside, the executive suite had been decorated with string lights and paper snowflakes, courtesy of the pediatric wing volunteers. One of the nurses had even brought in a tiny artificial tree adorned with miniature books instead of ornaments. Marissa sat by the window, legs tucked beneath her, watching the snow drift past like falling wishes. She was stronger now. The health scare had passed, though not without lingering consequences. Her body was still catching up. Bone density issues, vitamin deficiencies, and chronic anemia were all part of her medical chart. But her spirit was different, resilient, sharper than ever. "I want to go to school," she said one afternoon as Whitmore reviewed paperwork from his attorneys. He looked up, surprised. "You're already doing lessons with Maya twice a week." "I mean real school, with other kids, desks, PE. I want to raise my hand and get called on." Whitmore set his papers down. "We'll make it happen." He meant it. By the end of the week, Marissa had a private tutor certified by the state, a personal academic plan approved by the Department of Education, and early acceptance into one of Westbrook's top academies, pending a successful spring semester evaluation. That night, she danced barefoot on the hospital carpet. "I'm going to have a locker," she said. "I've always wanted one of those." Whitmore watched her, heart full. But even as her world expanded, his narrowed. Bradley hadn't gone away. After losing his position on the board and being cut out of the foundation's assets, he'd filed an appeal in probate court, challenging the validity of James Whitmore's will, estate plan, and guardianship of Marissa. "He's arguing that I'm mentally compromised," Whitmore told Dr. Chin, "and that Marissa was coerced into supporting my decisions." Chin exhaled. "He's relentless." "He's also dangerous," Whitmore said quietly. "And not because he's clever, because he's vindictive, and he sees this as personal." The court date loomed, scheduled for early January. It would determine whether Whitmore retained guardianship of Marissa, and by extension, whether she could remain in Westbrook or be placed in state custody. The thought chilled her more than the snow. "I don't want to go," she whispered one night, curled into his side. "You're not going anywhere," he said, brushing her curls back. "No judge is taking you from me." But even as he spoke, he remembered the hard truth. Systems didn't always reward love. They rewarded documentation. The legal team assembled evidence, testimonies, psychological evaluations, letters from teachers, doctors, and child welfare experts. Walter wrote a statement so powerful it brought one of the junior attorneys to tears. "I've seen hundreds of kids lost in the cracks," it read, "but I've never seen one climb out and pull someone else with them." Dr. Mason submitted a clinical recommendation. Dr. Chin wrote a professional endorsement. Still, there were whispers. People like Marissa didn't often get chosen. And when they did, others waited for them to fall. The morning of the hearing, Marissa wore a navy pea coat and gray wool tights. She looked older than her 9 years, more composed. But her hand in Whitmore's told the truth. She was still just a kid. The courtroom was full, press, attorneys, court observers. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Elaine Torres, had a reputation for fairness and unpredictability. Bradley's lawyer opened with a character assassination. "Mr. Whitmore's intentions may be noble," she said, "but the question is not whether he's generous. It's whether he's stable." She pointed to a chart of medications: antidepressants, blood thinners, cognitive enhancers. He is a recovering coma patient with no experience raising children, especially one with trauma. Whitmore's attorney responded with quiet force. Mr. Whitmore has made measurable decisions benefiting this child. He's improved her health, education, and emotional security. He's not just a guardian, he's a parent. Then it was Marissa's turn. She sat at the table, feet swinging slightly above the floor. The judge smiled gently. Marissa, do you understand why we're here today? Yes, Your Honor. And how do you feel about Mr. Whitmore being your guardian? Marissa glanced at him, then back to the judge. I didn't ask him to take care of me, but he did. Her voice didn't waver. And I didn't ask to save him, but I guess I did that too. The courtroom chuckled softly. The judge leaned forward. Do you feel safe with him? Yes. Do you want to stay with him? Yes. Do you understand what that means? Marissa paused. It means I have a home. Judge Torres nodded, then turned her attention to Bradley, who stood in a gray designer suit, hands folded. You are Mr. Whitmore's biological son? Yes, Your Honor. You've raised concerns about your father's mental health. Did you visit him often during his coma? Bradley stiffened. I had business obligations. How often did you visit? Bradley hesitated. Once every few months? And since he's awakened? I've attempted contact several times. The judge glanced at a calendar. He's been awake for 49 days. You've seen him twice. There was an audible shift in the room. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore, the judge said, closing her notebook. I'll return shortly with my decision. The wait felt like hours. Marissa clutched Whitmore's hand, eyes fixed on the courtroom door. When Judge Torres returned, her verdict came swiftly. Guardianship remains with James Whitmore. There is no evidence to suggest neglect or incapacity. This court recognizes the best interest of the child and the clear presence of love. Gasps, applause. Bradley stood motionless, jaw clenched. Whitmore turned to Marissa. It's over, he whispered. But Marissa shook her head. It's just beginning. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs, microphones, questions. How does it feel to win? What's next for you and Marissa? Whitmore wrapped an arm around her. We're going home. And that night in their warm suite, surrounded by string lights and hope, Marissa whispered, thank you, into the hush. Whitmore kissed her forehead. No, thank you. Spring arrived early in Westbrook. Tulips pushed through thawing ground outside the courthouse, and robins returned to nest in the trees along Whitmore Avenue. Inside courtroom 6B, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something hopeful. Marissa Robinson sat at the long table with a James Whitmore, wearing a lavender dress and a bracelet made of glass beads Dr. Mason had helped her craft. She looked taller than she had 3 months ago. Straighter, more sure. Across from them sat the state's adoption clerk, a representative from Child Welfare, and Judge Elaine Torres. The hearing was short, almost quiet. There were no objections this time, no challenges, no drama, just paperwork. And one question. Do you wish to adopt Marissa Robinson as your legal daughter? Judge Torres asked, pen in hand. Whitmore didn't hesitate. Yes. And Marissa, the judge continued, smiling gently, do you wish to be adopted by Mr. Whitmore? Yes, she said softly, then louder. Yes, Your Honor. The sound of the gavel was soft but final, like the closing of one book and the beginning of another. Outside, there were no reporters this time. No cameras, no flashing bulbs, just Walter, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. Told you it had happened, he said as he handed her the flowers. She hugged him hard. You were right. Your chin was there too, along with Maya, her tutor, and Dr. Mason, who wiped away tears with a tissue she tried to pretend wasn't needed. Even Officer Brennan sent a card. Congratulations, kid. You proved me wrong. I'm glad you did. Back at the hospital suite, a small adoption celebration was waiting. Nothing extravagant, just cupcakes, balloons, and a new nameplate for the room. Marissa Robinson Whitmore, age 9. She stared at it for a long time. You don't have to take my name if you don't want to, Whitmore said gently. Marissa shrugged. I like both. That night, she asked to sleep with the window cracked open, even though the night air was still chilly. I like the sound, she explained. It reminds me of freedom. In the weeks that followed, everything changed, and nothing did. She still woke early, still liked her oatmeal plain, still read under the covers with a flashlight even when she didn't need to hide it anymore. But now there was school, uniforms, a locker. Her very first friend, Amaya, who thought Marissa was cool because she'd been on TV. There were also awkward parts, like when another girl asked if she was Whitmore's real daughter. Yeah, Marissa replied, straight-faced. I'm real. Are you? The school called Whitmore that day. He laughed for a full minute, then said, good answer. The Whitmore Foundation, meanwhile, had never been more active. The Robinson Initiative opened its first shelter in a renovated brownstone near Eastern Heights. It had 10 beds, 3 caseworkers, and a small library curated by Marissa herself. When she visited for the ribbon cutting, she saw her mother's name etched in bronze above the entrance, the Letitia House. She stood beneath it, head tilted upward, and whispered, you made it, Mama. Across the country, similar facilities began springing up. Detroit, Atlanta, Oakland, each tailored to the specific needs of its community, each driven by youth voices. Marissa appeared in a few of the videos, PSAs, interviews, a panel on homelessness hosted by a national nonprofit. But she always made sure the attention went to the mission. I'm not the story, she said in one spot. The story is how many kids we haven't seen yet. Still, stories about her continued. She was featured in Time for Kids, named to a top 10 under 10 list, received an honorary key to the city. She gave it to Walter. I don't need a key, she told the mayor. He already opened the door. Bradley, meanwhile, faded into relative obscurity. His appeal was denied. The embezzlement investigation remained open. Rumors swirled about a move to Europe or the Caymans. No one paid much attention anymore. One afternoon, Whitmore found Marissa in the suite study, seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by folders. What are you working on? He asked. Budgets, she said. For what? The Marissa Scholarship Fund. I want to help kids like me who are smart but can't go to fancy schools. Whitmore chuckled. Should I be worried you're taking over already? Not yet, she said, but maybe soon. By summer, she'd grown an inch, had a best friend, won a school essay contest with a piece called The Girl in the Hallway. And on the final day of 4th grade, she stood in front of her class and read this aloud. I used to think being invisible was safer, but now I know that being seen can be a kind of light. When someone sees you and still stays, that's what saves you. Her teacher cried. So did half the class. Whitmore wasn't there. He had flown to D.C. to testify before a Senate panel on child homelessness. But he watched a video on the plane and texted her the moment it ended. You lit the whole room up. I'm so proud of you. That night, she wrote him back. Thank you for seeing me, for staying. I love you, Dad. He stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, always. And that, dear reader, is the story of how a homeless girl changed the life of a sleeping billionaire. Not with magic, not with money, but with presence, with persistence, with love. If you believe stories like Marissa's matter, share this one. Tell someone, donate, volunteer, or just open your eyes a little wider today, because you never know who's hiding in plain sight, waiting to be seen, waiting to be chosen.